Record.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this very exciting event. My name is Ingrid. I'm the minister at Weird Church in Cumberland, and I'm just so excited to be here with everybody, learning about climate change. But I think more importantly, leaning into the hope and optimism, the resilience of where we need to be in order to not get stuck in despair and despondency and fear and inaction. And there are no three people better equipped to teach us about that than our speakers here tonight. And so before we get started, just a reminder for those who are just popping in now that we are recording this, and we will be putting it on the Weird Church YouTube channel. And just a quick word about Weird Church. I know that we aren't physically in Weird Church's space in Cumberland right now, but Weird Church is a place where everyone can belong. And so whether you are here and you are very much not a church person, or you are here and you are very much a church person, you are welcome. If climate change is top of your mind because you're excited to start moving into action, you are welcome. If you are here because you are terrified and you don't know what to do for your children and grandchildren, you are welcome here. I will reiterate this in a little bit, but some of what is talked about can be really challenging and triggering for some folks. And so you know yourself best, and you know when something is too hard, too challenging, too sticky, too pricky, too icky to deal with on your own. And so know that I'm in the community, or, well, I'm in the community, but some of you are not. But you can always reach me by email if you need to talk about something, or if I am not your person, but you have a person, I really encourage you to reach out to them to talk about anything that really stays stuck in there or in your heart, something that's in your belly that you can't get rid of. Please do reach out and connect and seek the help that you need to work through those challenging feelings. Now, before we get any further into things, I do want to invite Sarah Burrell, who is on the Weird Church Truth and Reconciliation team, to offer a land acknowledgement. Sarah, I saw you here. There you are.
Thank you, Ingrid Gala-Kessler. My name is Sarah Burrell, and I humbly thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to do an acknowledgement this evening as we start this important and optimistic community conversation experience together. I am a fifth-generation Scottish-English colonizer to Turtle Island. My ancestors are from the Canadian Atlantic provinces, which are on the treaty territories of the Mi'kmaq nations. And respectfully and gratefully, I recognize that I currently live, work, pray, and play on the never treated territories of the Comox First Nations, the keepers of these lands. I invite those that are with us from outside the Comox First Nations that you consider the nations on whom lands you live, work, pray, and play, and the stewardship that took place for these lands to be sustaining all of us today. Let us all take a moment together to give silent thanks. I'm a learner on this decolonization path, and the language of the Comox First Nations, Kwakwala and North Salish are challenging on my English tongue. An Indigenous practice gifted in the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer is to humbly try and try again. Perfectionism is actually colonial conditioning. And as I practice, I also think of all the children taken to residential schools, brutally forced to shape their mouths and tongues around English. And I know I can at least humbly try and invite all of you to try with Kwakwala. And so today, I try shaping the words in my mouth and tongue. The Comox Nation is comprised of descendants from the Pentlach, Lekwito, and the 5 Comox tribes, the Satlut, Salitla, Liksum, Chachu, and Tapu. At Weird Church, each week, we learn a Kwakwala language word together. And I'd like to share the word Aitusto with all of you today. This is to rise or to rise again. I take a moment and try that out loud for yourself. I tusto.
I tusto.
Feel it in your mouth. I think this word's important for us on this climate conversation journey because we need to rise up together. We need to continue to rise and to use our voices. We need to, I tusto, to greet this climate challenge with optimism and with each other. In an article by Gleb Ragorekdowski, they share that for thousands of years, Indigenous people occupied the shoreline of eastern Vancouver Island in a place referred to as the land of plenty. And one of the Indigenous sayings is, when the tide is out, the table is set. Mother Earth blessed this area with plenty. Resilience in the face of change is embedded in Indigenous knowledge and know-how, diversified resources and livelihoods, social institutions and networks, and cultural values and attitudes. Indigenous knowledge provides a crucial foundation for community-based adaptation and mitigation actions that sustain resilience of social ecological systems at the interconnected local, regional, and global scales. And although Indigenous peoples' low carbon traditional ways of life have contributed little to climate change, Indigenous peoples are most adversely affected by it around the world. This is largely a result of their historic dependence on local biological diversity, ecosystem services, and cultural landscapes as a source of sustenance and well-being. Indigenous responses to climate variation typically involve changes to livelihood practices and other socioeconomic adjustments. Strategies such as engaging in multiple livelihood activities and maintaining a diversity of plant varieties and animal races provide a buffer. And there are opportunities for collaboration and learning happening for Indigenous peoples. These collaborations provide an opportunity not only to present their experiences and knowledge about climate change in their communities, but to gain valuable information on global climate processes that are affecting their communities. On these lands, the Comox First Nation is participating with the Nature Trust of BC to research and monitor climate change impacts on key estuaries in their territories. For example, the pink salmon run on the Solom River is monitored by local stewardship groups, including the Comox First Nation Guardian Watchmen. There is also a very overt collaboration with the Kukusum project, which is very visible in our community. I'm so thankful for the opportunities for collaboration and for giving respect to the incredible stewardship, know-how, and practices the Comox First Nations brings to this land of plenty. And I'm hopeful we can move forward in a good way together. I finished this acknowledgement with a quote from Christy Belko in 2018. The plants are our teachers. They are connected to each other and all other spiritual beings through the sacredness of life. When I remember who I am, a human being connected to all life, I remember also that I am loved by the spirit world and our ancestors. And when I remember this, I remember to respect even the smallest of things. Thank you. Haile Kesla.
Hela Kesla, thank you so much, Sarah. In order to get started, I want to give you a little quick bio on each of our presenters today. I'm going to start with Meaghan Cursons. Meaghan is an interdisciplinary conservationist and nonprofit leader with over 25 years experience in environmental, cultural, and economic development sectors in the Salish Sea region. She is the executive director of the Cumberland Community Forest Society and a watershed protection public educator for the CVRD. In her spare time, as though she would have any, she produces unique cultural events and climate theater projects with children and adults in Cumberland. Meaghan is a high energy organizer, we know this, facilitator and presenter with a passion for bringing together diverse disciplines to build resilient community. We also have with us Will Cole Hamilton, who is a counselor at the City of Courtenay and director of the Comox Valley Regional District. Like one of his co-facilitators, Tina, he is a graduate of the Climate Reality Program. Will is a founding member and now chair of the Climate Caucus, a national network of over 400 mayors and councillors focused on building and sharing climate change solutions. Will also has a background in stand-up comedy and is still trying to find humor in climate change. And Tina Willard-Stepan, who is the organizer of all this big event, the Climate Conversations at Weird Church, the instigator, the animator of it. She is an educator, facilitator, and community developer. Her primary work at this time is as environmental educator with the Comox Valley Regional District. She develops resources for use in the classroom and works as a community resource to educators. As a BC certified teacher, she has many years of experience in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors, which makes her a person passionate about making community connections and supporting fellow humans in making connections, especially in relation to living more consciously on the earth. Following her completion of Al Gore's International Climate Leadership Training, she was called to partner with Weird Church on this series. That's what she says, but really, she called Weird Church to partner on this series. And so now I'm going to invite Tina to take to the floor and begin this wonderful workshop. Thank you so much, Tina.
Thanks, Ingrid, and thank you so much, Sarah, for the gorgeous land acknowledgement. I'm going to fidget with my screen for a moment and get the slideshow going. I was having a little bit of trouble earlier, and so I just need to swap my screen around. Thanks for your patience. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to see so many people here interested and willing to engage, and just really, really excited about this project in general. So I'm just going to share my screen, and Ingrid, I'll get you to tell me if it's on and good. It looks like it is on my end.
We are good to go.
Okay, thank you. So this is Let's Talk Climate, and it's the first night of a series of things I'm going to talk about. We technically started last weekend with the opening of an art show. I'll get to that too, but this is our first evening, and Sarah did such a wonderful job of grounding us in place, and I want to continue with that. First, I'm going to tell you a story about how this came to be. So I've had a really varied career, as Ingrid said, that has settled most recently into working as a facilitator and contract educator. And at first, the role unfolded as like a 3 hours guest speaker in the classroom. But more and more, I would have students as young as 6 or 7 coming up to me and saying things like, the world is ending in 7 years anyway, so why should I bother doing things like recycling? Which was actually very anxiety inducing for me. I thought to myself, I'm not really a climate expert, but my role as educator sent me down the path of thinking about a much bigger picture than just waste reduction. And so with this larger project, we're creating an immersive experience for us to all feel our feelings about this together and decide what we want to be doing with our time and what we want this world to look like, and what we want this next stage of humanity to be like, and doing that with intention. So I want us to all just arrive to where we are right now. And I had the honor of speaking at a youth climate conference that happened about a minute before COVID at the Philbrook Center. And I did this visualization exercise in that room and had great feedback. And I want to do it again with you. And this is just for us to arrive together and sort of. And so I want to know our faces are on screens, but we're all going to close our eyes. So we're not even going to look at each other. So I want to invite us to close our eyes for a moment and just feel where you're sitting. And that might be on a chair, you might be lounging on a bed, you might be standing in the kitchen cooking dinner and have your camera off. But if you could just take a moment to feel where you are. And then I want to use our imaginations, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a few minutes, but use our imaginations to imagine a drone above your head, seeing you sitting in the place that you're sitting. And then magically, this drone is going to zip up through the ceiling and hover above your home or your office or wherever you are right now. And we're going to take on a little Google Maps zoom out vibe. And just imagine zooming out from where you are to see your neighborhood. I'm in Cumberland. I can see the village now. To keep zooming out and see the town or city where you are. Keep zooming out. And for me now, I can see the whole Comox Valley and Vancouver Island, and zooming further and further out, like we're on Google Maps. And we're going right out into the atmosphere in the sky. Now I'm looking at all of North America and zooming outside of the atmosphere and looking back at this beautiful blue globe that we call Earth. And the first photo of this, when it was released, changed a lot about how people thought about the Earth. And so I just want to hold for a moment that we can pull ourselves out and look at it in this whole way. And then we're going to reverse that, and we're going to zoom in and bring ourselves back, zooming in towards the atmosphere, towards North America, back to wherever your town or city is. For me, it's British Columbia, onto the island. I'm zooming back into my town and my neighborhood, and I'm going to hover a moment above my home or my office where I am, and just feel really grateful to be here. And then my magical drone imagination is going to zip down through the ceiling and the roof of my home and back into my body, where I can feel myself sitting and being here. And I'll just invite you, when you're feeling ready, to open your eyes and reflect that we are here, you are here, and you're alive, and we are connected to all of that. All of that we just saw is a part of where we are. And so I'm going to take us on a funny journey right now, because this, all of our promotional literature and the way we've been talking about this, and thank you for playing with that visualization, is about climate hope and optimism. But as you're going to learn in the second part of what I talk about, it's really important to actually ground in what's going on. So I'm going to do a quick 101, what is climate change? We have a really, we thought it best to be sure that we're starting from basic understanding of what climate change is and why it's a problem. This is going to be a brief Coles Notes version, as we have a mixed and pretty knowledgeable group here, I suspect, but I don't know everyone's backgrounds. We weren't quite sure of audience. So I'm going to go through that now, and that's the heavy part of the presentation. And then we're going to weave in the other parts. So just so you know, that's where I'm going. And Ingrid spoke about if there are things that are triggering for you to take the space that you need. So climate change, which is now often called the climate crisis, is a term used to refer to an increased rate of change in the climate caused by human impacts. And the science is pretty clear. It's very clear. Basically, the energy comes from to the Earth from the sun. The sun is the primary source of energy for the Earth's climate system. It makes life on Earth possible by warming the biosphere, driving the water cycle and the wind, and photosynthesizing plants, including, of course, human food. And about 71% of this total incoming solar energy is absorbed by the Earth. The remainder is reflected back to space by clouds, atmospheric particles, and bright ground surfaces like sea ice and snow. But some of this outgoing infrared is trapped by the natural greenhouse gas layer, which is great because it keeps the temperature within comfortable boundaries for all life forms here on Earth, including us. So greenhouse gases actually play an instrumental role in regulating the planet's temperature. Things like carbon and methane and nitrous oxide, they trap the sun's energy into the atmosphere. And the result is this greenhouse effect that keeps the world's annual average surface temperature about 15 degrees Celsius, which is about 30 degrees Celsius warmer than if the Earth didn't have an atmosphere, basically keeping it livable and us alive. The problem is that we're thickening this natural greenhouse gas layer with artificial human greenhouse gas emissions, and more of the outgoing heat is trapped, and so the temperatures are going up. Human activities, mostly burning fossil fuels, have disrupted the natural greenhouse process and have unbalanced the Earth's energy equilibrium. So today, higher concentrations of greenhouse gases trap more incoming solar energy than goes out. Since 1900, there's been a 43% increase in the warming effect by these long-lived greenhouse gases. Al Gore, when he does this presentation, talks about it from the perspective that we're essentially treating our atmosphere like an open sewer without understanding the delicate balance that we need to maintain for life on Earth to thrive and survive. But it's not an open sewer. This is our atmosphere. This is the lower part of the atmosphere where the greenhouse gases are collected is shockingly thin, and we're filling it up. On this beautiful photo from NASA's Earth Observatory, which is where we just flew up to in our imaginations. This is just above us. And this layer we need to maintain balance within is only like 16 kilometers thick. And where are these extra greenhouse gas emissions coming from that are problematic? Well, it's coming from the burning of fossil fuels in transportation and energy production, mining, agriculture, particularly animal agriculture is a part of it, and the burning and clearing of forests, the thawing of permafrost, and other sources. The main source by far is the burning of fossil fuels, which really went into overdrive after World War I. And now we see this huge accumulation of CO2. So this is a graph showing the growth of global carbon emissions from fossil fuels in billion metric tons of carbon from 1850 to 2020. You can see it took a really big leap. And as a consequence, the temperatures on Earth have been going up steadily, setting new records all the time. This is another graph showing the global average surface temperature anomalies every year from 1880 to 2020. So what does this end up looking like for us? Why is this problematic? How does it affect us? Well, for starters, it's warmer. So, well, on one day earlier this year, there were at least 4 countries that hit temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius. This is a map showing global surface air temperatures on June 6, 2021. It's very red, so it's very hot. It's red like my face because I'm blushing, I'm nervous. So Lytton in British Columbia reached 49 degrees and was the single most anomalous event ever measured. It was in this Pacific Northwest of America earlier this year. We had this experience, this heat dome, and it was a pretty big event. So when we step back and look at the Earth as a whole, 93% of this extra heat is going into the oceans, and that is disrupting the water cycle. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the ways this is affecting us directly. Warmer ocean temperatures have been hitting records almost every year now. This chart showing global ocean temperatures. 2020 ocean temperatures set a new record. How does this affect us? Well, warmer oceans make ocean-based storms much stronger. The latest example in the Western Hemisphere was Hurricane Ida, which went over waters of the Gulf of Mexico, where the water was 4 degrees Celsius warmer than normal. This is that map of the Gulf of Mexico. Essentially, warmer oceans mean stronger storms. They result in more intense storms, rapid intensification of storms, and higher wind speeds. And this, I just learned, warmer air can hold more water vapor. So that's why the storms are bigger. That's why we get these big atmospheric rivers. For every degree Celsius that the atmosphere warms, the air can hold 7% more water vapor, which is a lot. And I also learned this recently, which I wasn't aware of, that warmer water takes up more space. So this, along with melting land ice, has caused global sea levels to rise, yielding higher storm surges that can move further inland than they otherwise would. This is India had the strongest storm ever to make landfall this year. This is a satellite image of it. So bigger storms, that's hotter, bigger storms. And as temperatures increase, oceans also evaporate, as I said, oceans evaporate more moisture into the sky. So this is called a quadruple microburst descending from the sky in Midland, Texas during a storm earlier this year in June. Last year, I guess. Atmospheric rivers, which we've seen on the coast. This is a picture of the lower mainland flooded. A lot of us saw this on the news. And this is a picture that Will shared with me generously of Courtney in 2014. So we are at risk of flooding here being on the ocean. And the same heat that is causing this evaporation off the oceans and the rain bombs and the floods and the mudslides is also pulling moisture out of the topsoil around the world, making droughts much deeper and longer. And close to home. These regions are indicative of drought, and this happens to be where all of our food is grown. So these things become relevant to us quickly. When there's more drought and higher temperatures, fires increase. lockstep, and we experience more and more of this each year in British Columbia and all over. This is a photo of Lytton where I said it had reached 40 degrees. A quote shared with me from the Lytton mayor: "I'm 60 and I thought that climate change was a problem for the next generation. Now I am mayor of a town that no longer exists." Now, of course, Lytton still exists, but their infrastructure burned down and very quickly. Extra heat is also melting ice in Greenland and Antarctica, and this glacier in Greenland is now gone. And we are seeing the recession of our own Comox Glacier. This is actually an old photograph. I suspect it's receded quite a bit more. Island glaciers are predicted to disappear within 25 years, and this article is from 2014. The same thing is true in Antarctica. Decade by decade, we see accelerated ice loss, as you see here in this graph of ice loss from 1979 to 2017. And these are the top 10 cities at risk from sea level rise by population. A lot of them are in South Asia and Southeast Asia. Nearly a third of the world's population, or 2.4 billion people, live within 100 kilometers of coastline. So this becomes really significant to a lot of people. There are even countries like Kiribati is the first nation to purchase land in another country so that climate refugees from their country can go to another country. And not only do we have businesses and beloved recreation areas and homes that will be impacted by water rising potentially, combined with all these extreme weather events, but our systems get put under tremendous strain when we have these weather events. And it is the poorest of the poor in the world. That includes poor in people in prosperous societies who are going to be the worst hit. The largest impacts have to do with social justice. So these are people in Mozambique receiving food distribution because of drought. And yes, this does move into climate optimism. A lot of climate refugees are already leaving places that they've called home for a long time. Somebody pointed something out interesting to me too, and then I noticed it. I met a woman the other day who'd moved from near Calgary, where her house, she was tired of, she lives in a floodplain and had suffered, she lived in High River and their home was destroyed by flood, and they moved here as a result of that. So in some way we're the recipients of Canadian climate refugees. And it's affecting Indigenous people in the north in terms of safety, ice loss, threatening their ways of life. And as we know closer to home, climate change and increased extreme weather events disproportionately affect those. This is a photo of our Connect Warming Center peeps who were really madly gathering waterproof clothing and coats this year because of extreme weather events, and people who are unhoused having to endure that. So the last thing I'm going to address in terms of effects on us that we're noticing with regards to climate change is climate and biodiversity are inextricably connected with each other and with human futures. This is a great, way too detailed, but diagram of how cyclical this is in nature. Why are these so linked? Changing temperatures deeply affect ecosystems and how they function, and healthy and functioning ecosystems are essential for human health. Meaghan's going to be talking about this a little bit later. So climate change impacts the ecosystem health, and ecosystem health helps us deal with climate change because healthy ecosystems actually provide services to us that mitigate the effects of climate change. They sequester carbon from the atmosphere, they support the storage of water in the soil, protect us from extreme weather events, provide us with food. So we need to encourage, nurture, and protect biodiversity, not just like a feel-good tree hugger thing, but for literally for our own, to support our own survival. So nature-based climate solutions are extremely important. Tanis, yeah, this is the Facebook post that you did. I pulled this off the interweb as I was prepping for this. So no effective climate solutions can happen without conservation and reforestation. Natural climate solutions can get us 1/3 of the way the emissions reductions that we need to reach our climate targets, and forests are a big part of this. So this is our very own Comox Valley Land Trust here, an article out of the UK. In a two-way process, this is from the article, climate change is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss, but destruction of ecosystem undermines nature's ability to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. It's that circular thing I was talking about. We need the biodiversity, we're affecting it. So this explains why the two crises must be tackled together with holistic policies that address both issues simultaneously. Woo, okay. So that was a baseline 101 introduction. So we're all aware of what's going on with climate change, how it's affecting us globally and locally, and it's a lot. And when I actually ended up taking a leave of absence from my work due to anxiety, when I started having 6-year-olds coming up and asking me these difficult questions. And so I want to make sure that we start from a real place, from a place like we are feeling some eco-anxiety, which is actually a real psychological term now used in the industry to describe the chronic fear over environmental doom and gloom. IPCC headlines like code red for humanity. And so this stress and uncertainty over a long period of time is really, it affects our health and overall well-being, our brains, our bodies, as well as creating paralysis in terms of taking action. So helping people translate their fears into action helps them offset this emotional toll. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So it helps us move forward in a new direction. So it's win-win. It makes us feel better, it addresses our mental health stuff, and it also helps us take action. Anxiety about the future, detachment, self-deception, feelings of resentment and helplessness, which I know a lot of youth feel right now. It's a perilous psychological state. And it's the starting line of a fast track to the end of hope, honestly. And so it also makes the future we fear more likely to happen, because the best way to ensure we'll fail to solve our problems is to believe that we can't. I want to invite you right now to do something a little bit interactive for those who are comfortable and used to using, there should be a chat button on your screen. Self-care is really important, but I want to know where we're starting from. So I just want to invite you to type into the chat, what number on this scale of faces might you be about climate change right now? Are you a 0 and you're pretty neutral today? Are you feeling like 11 or 12, just too serious for numbers? So I just want to invite people. I'm going to watch the chat. Let's watch the chat. Okay, we've got some 9s in the room. 3, okay. Jones a 5 around the middle. 5 to 7. Okay, there's some panic. Look, there's some tears at 7. That's when the tears start. Nobody with eyeballs popping out yet. A 5, okay. People are feeling okay today. Cindy's a 7 there, tears. George, 10. George, I hear you. I totally hear you. Megan, 7. Okay, too serious. Yeah. So we have to start from this place of really honoring where we are. How are we really feeling about this? And I think what's happening, what I'm noticing, is people are feeling these higher numbers, 6 to 7. Yeah. So they're just not talking about it, because we have enough hard shit happening right now. So why do we want to talk about that too? And so, yeah, a 6 or 7. Yeah, Sarah, a 7. I hear you. Okay. This is me, because I'm an optimist. I oscillate between, yeah, we're going to do this thing, and oh, no, we're not. We're not. So this is sort of how I feel. So I want to start now into this process of talking about climate hope and optimism. I was listening to a climate podcaster who's bilingual in Mandarin, Chinese, and English, and he introduced this word Weiji, which my friend Kevin helped me spell it right and pronounce it right. Weiji is the Mandarin Chinese word for crisis, and an accurate translation of this word is it's transformation. Actually, it's a crucial point when something's going to change. So change is in the definition of crisis, and thinking of the climate crisis in this way can be helpful. Because the definition of change, well, this climate change is real. We just expressed our feelings about this. We've heard all the bad news. It's bad. I'm just gonna, oh, thank you. The anthropogenic or human impacts on the earth have created real problems, and that we as a species are going to need to face. And this means change. Every one of us will need to grapple with a changing world, but there is nothing in this definition that says the world will come to an end in 7 years. It says the definition of change is to replace something else, especially with something of the same kind, newer or better. So this helps us start kind of recalibrate how we're thinking of change. This cartoon has been on my fridge for about 20 years. I love it so much. She's saying at the bottom, if you can't see it, I was wondering when you noticed there are a lot more steps. So I'm going to keep revisiting this idea through the whole series, right until our final night, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. But we're the idea that we're in a story of sorts. And Sarah at the beginning spoke of the beginning of this story. We're in, oops, oh my goodness. Whoa. Do not scroll, Tina. Okay. So we're in a story of sorts and we're in the middle of it. Like humans have been in this area where we live for more than 10,000 years. And now we're here in the middle of the story and there's a future in the story ahead of us. We're on this trajectory. We're in this story and people think in stories. So what story do we want to tell young people who will become adults during what is likely to be an age of loss? What vision of the future can we create for them? Children and adults alike live through stories. We're always telling stories to ourselves. In times of perplexing and unprecedented and dangerous threats, we can learn a lot from the childhood imagination. That wonderful capacity to generate the endless, like, how about this? How about that? Like, how about I be a king and you be my horse? Or how about I'm a dragon who sweeps in and saves the world? And so that's where hope starts coming in. For us to succeed and prosper during this time, we need to be active. We need to activate our ability to imagine possibilities without too quickly intervening with constraints and our fear and our cynicism. So while uncertainties can definitely reasonably provoke a fear of the unknown, they also give us grounds for hope because it creates the mental space in which we can imagine different possibilities. So sometimes the future unknowns, when they finally reveal themselves to us, are beneficial and sometimes surprise us and turn out to be good. This happened in South Africa in the 1980s. There was real fear of revolution, chaos, and violence when they ended apartheid. And it didn't roll out that way. It didn't happen. And so the hope can only exist where there's uncertainty. So we're in this time of fear and uncertainty, but that's where hope lives. So I want to now get into some sciencey based. It turns out that being optimistic about the future of our environment is very well researched. It's a very well researched methodology to motivate people to make the changes that we need to see happen in our culture and to address the very real and scary issues we face around climate change. So Alina Bennett in the top left here, I'm going to share with you my two professional crushes. Alina Bennett is an associate professor for the Department of Natural Resource Sciences in the School of Environment at McGill University. And as a researcher, she's an ecosystem ecologist and the co-founder of a group called Seeds of a Good Anthropocene, which collects and studies the ways that people address environmental problems. The Anthropocene, for those of you who don't know, is the period of history of the Earth during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate and the environment. For those of you who are deeply embedded in these conversations, that word can also be controversial, but this is what it's called, Seeds of a Good Anthropocene, which I love. So Alina's take on it is that people make choices based on what they believe about society and what they expect for the future. So with this in mind, her organization focuses on bright spots, highlighting successful, hyper-local projects related to climate resilience, researching the success of these projects, and looking at ways to share them and scale them up. So you can see the image on the right-hand side of the screen there are actually bright spots all over the map of the world because she is researching these projects now. So she says, we aim to help the global community develop inspirational visions and stories, helping to shape the very reality that they forecast. We do this by looking to the emergence of new thinking, innovative ways of living, and different means to connect people and nature that already exist. So you'll see that's the images on the right are the bright spots that have been included in her research. And that's what we're going to be doing here today. We're going to be introducing our local bright spots. And I'll stop talking soon and hand the mic over. Alan Kelsey, who's on the bottom left, is a scholar and educator in the area of evidence-based hope. That's a photo of her book, Hope Matters. She's a leader in hopeful, solution-focused environmental movements. She speaks about the emotional implications of this narrative of environmental doom and gloom on children and adults. And basically that it's not good for our mental health and it's not proven to motivate us to make any change. And I'm actually going to break it up a little here. And I'm going to let Ellen Kelsey say this in her own words in about 1 minute. This is Ellen here.
Hi, my name is Ellen Kelsey, and I think the thing we have to focus on right now is that the environmental crisis is also a crisis of hope. We need to actively challenge the tired narrative of environmental doom and gloom that reproduces a hopeless status quo. By focusing our attention so heavily on what's broken, we are reinforcing a starting line fallacy that makes us feel as if nothing useful has ever been accomplished and that all the hard work lies ahead. The number one way we learn about climate change and other environmental issues is through the media, and almost all of that news, according to environmental journalism research, is bad news. We rarely hear about environmental solutions that are working, and without a full picture, we easily fall prey to assuming the worst. Many children honestly believe the world may end during their lifetime as a result of climate change or other global threats. Indeed, the psychological impact of those feelings is so profound that it's recognized as a mental health and well-being issue by professional associations of psychologists in the United States, Canada, Australia, and other countries. When it comes to the environment, we need to focus on specific time-stamped content and on positive emerging trends. For example, a critical mass of people all over the planet now know about and are worried about climate change. 2019 was a record year for climate engagement thanks to the climate strikes. Now 1 in 10 people on Earth live in a place that has declared a climate emergency. Stories change. Restoration is possible. We live in a world that is alive with 8.7 million other kinds of species, and we are not the only ones actively responding to the crises we face. Social networks between trees promote faster regrowth of forests, just as social networks of humpback whales have led to population recoveries in many parts of the world faster than scientists predicted. And those recoveries of populations of humpback whales and gray whales and other species of whales around the world are having a positive impact. More whales means more plankton and more fish and more trapping of greenhouse gas emissions. Far from making us complacent, stories of resilience and recovery fuel hope and counteract cynicism and emotional paralysis. Remember, emotions are contagious, both face-to-face and online. The more we engage with trends that are achieving meaningful results, the more hopeful we feel, and the more we spread those feelings to others who will in turn amplify those transformative solutions. Hope is what sustains us to keep fighting for social and ecological justice. Hope is not complacent. It is a powerful political act.
That's Ellen Kelsey, one of my professional crushes. She's lovely, and I've seen her speak a number of times. I wanted to say thank you to her best video. Thank you, Ellen. She referred to something called the fallacy of the start line. So this really struck me when I saw her speak the first time. It obstructs our ability to take action. So we hear about this giant thing called the climate crisis. Remember, crisis means change coming at us, and we're paralyzed because we don't know where to begin. And the reality is we've already begun. We are in the middle of it. We're in the middle of a story, and there are people all over the world doing amazing things that we can magnify, that we can join in, that we can support and use as inspiration. So this fallacy that we have to begin something does not need to keep us from acting. The focus of both of these amazing teachers is that while information on what is actually happening, which I've covered, is vitally important for people to understand, the focus of our attention should be more on where we want to join in, where we want to be heading, and formulating a more positive narrative about what that might look like. So a more positive story as we live and think in stories. So it's like steering a car. You're going to steer the car towards what you're looking at. So here, we just want to look more towards the hope and the future. And we each carry within us an evolutionary blueprint for making this good society. We know how to do this. We need to talk about it, and we need to think about it, and not feel paralyzed. So another amazing, we have actually a list of suggested resources on the Weird Church website, which maybe Ingrid could share in the chat later. And or just go on Weird Church website and it'll be there. Thomas Homer Dixon's written a book called Commanding Hope, and he's actually known for being a super cynicist about climate, and then he ended up with young kids and didn't know how to talk to them about it. And now he's written this book called Commanding Hope, which is also very well researched. So he says humanity can't and won't address its urgent challenges unless enough of us from a broad range of cultures and societies recognize ourselves as one group with a shared sense of identity facing these challenges and developing solutions together. Part of this project is about us creating a shared sense of identity locally. Oddly enough, although I don't know if I can say that this last couple of weeks, the pandemic has created a shared sense of reality. So that's one of the things, one of the like magic ingredients that we need right now. The other thing that he says is the answers lie just outside the periphery of our conscious imagination. So we can't solve it with what we know. It's just on the edge of what we don't know. So we have one of the focuses of this project is to enter this conversation through the arts and our right hand brain so that we're more creative. I have an art show and I'll talk about other things. So how do we activate our imaginations? We ask questions. What do we imagine our futures to be? If we think and share stories, how can we create that story? And we want to create a story that doesn't look like a Mad Max film. And I think a lot of people have that narrative in their head. We need to be able to entertain the possibility that we don't know what this is going to look like and be able to imagine a shared future together. We also need connection to the natural world because people take care of what they love and care about. In a moment, we're going to be speaking about some projects underway in our community that are doing just that. So we need to be connecting and anchoring ourselves in a love of place and finding out how to take action to create this shared future. It's a difficult topic for us to speak about because we easily fall into despair and this doom and gloom place. Thomas Homer Dixon also speaks about hope that versus hope to. So there's a key difference between these two things. And Ellen referred to it a little bit, active hope. So hope that is passive, like I hope that I win the lottery. And hope to is active and bold. It's a difference that affects our agency and our sense of control as we deal with humanity's problems. So this psychological shift makes us active agents in the story, a protagonist of the story, converting us from being spectators or bystanders to being protagonists with a role to play in a story. And it converts the object of our hope of a vision of a desired future into a set of definite goals that we can move towards and we can strive to achieve. I have another brief video. So this one I'm actually going to put on 0.75 speed because it goes really fast, but this is from climateoptimism.org. crazy video, sorry. I show that a lot to youth, and that was 0.75 speed. That's the attention span. So part of this is about believing that we can. And Ellen Kelsey has some great tips. So I think this might be my last slide about this to pass the mic. But Mr. Rogers always said, look for the helpers, right? So we need to talk about our fear and pain, as these strong feelings are very real and can often, we need to talk about it. We need to talk about our values, what's important to us, and then how do we make it a reality. Ellen Kelsey referred to this in that first video. When researching, we need to share current date stamped information because things change. The story is unfolding and quickly. We want to investigate and share examples of what citizens all over the world are doing, like Alina Bennett says. It's helpful to avoid catastrophic language. And also it's really helpful to follow hashtags, which is where I found that video, like climate optimism, climate resilience, so that your own, the news that you're digesting is not just what we see on the 6 o'clock news. Oh, so that's the WHO, climate, hope, and optimism. But what can I do? What can I do? So we're going to investigate now some local bright spots. And I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to go through my slides really quickly because I have 3 projects I want to address. And I see Genevieve's in the audience. I'm going to speak to one of yours. But let's look at what's happening here locally and find out how we can learn about it, investigate it, amplify it, be inspired by it, and create a new thing. So that's what we're working towards over the next few weeks. So I'm gonna start this off with a couple slides and then pass it off. So climate and the environment are being taught in the Comox Valley schools. I don't know how many of you know that, but it's happening quite a lot. Local place-based teacher resource guides have been developed. They're available for free. What can you do about that? If you have a student in a school, have their teacher request a free presentation. Tell their teacher about it. If you're a teacher, if you have young ones, make sure that you know that this is happening and let the school district know that we want to grow this movement. I'm pretty sure there's a larger movement afoot all across BC. A group of high school students have started this Climate Education Reform BC, and they met with the BC Ministry of Education in August, and they're calling for more in-depth climate education curriculum at all levels. I think I saw Sheila McDonnell's name in the room, and I think that we have a local group here that are approaching our school district with the Green New Deal. So how can you help with this? Call your school board trustees. This group here on the screen is actively seeking donations and volunteer support for their cause. So that's happening. Lake Trail School and Huban, we have schools that are trying to go completely waste-free that I'm supporting them on projects with. So this initiative, it includes landfill tours and orientations for teachers. And this is a brand new green station at Lake Trail School. Are we bumbling through it? Absolutely. Are they doing it? For sure. Would they accept volunteers to help with this, as well as their waste-free lunch program that Lake Trail Community Education Society runs? For sure. So schools really have their sights turned towards this and could use support. After Greta Thunberg initiated Fridays for Future, climate marches started happening all over the world, and we have our very own Comox Youth Climate Council. They coordinate marches here, among other things. On February 19th, they'll be on site making climate signs and hopefully leading a march from the church. Whoop, whoop. I just saw Ingrid. Whoop, whoop. This amazing small crew of volunteers is also recruiting new members. If you know a 15 to 25-year-old, they would love their group to grow, and they're really doing amazing things. They're looking for community mentors and adult allies, depending on what project they're working on. So if you want to engage with this group, I could be a contact, or you could look them up online. And then Genevieve, this is your baby, but what used to be contracted out as private enterprise to operate the campsite at Comox Lake is now run by the Cumberland Lake Wilderness Society, which is a nonprofit society that operates the campground as a social enterprise. So the campground makes money, and they create free park programs and school programs, and they integrate watershed protection. And this model of social enterprise benefits the whole community because of this. They create opportunities for environmental education on site. So projects like this are happening. They're underway. The fallacy of the start line is not real. We've already started. And I'm going to pass the mic now to Meaghan Cursons, who is an amazing community leader and has some thoughts to share on some projects that she's been involved with.
Thank you, Tina. And thanks so much for including me tonight and in this work and in this project and keeping me centered on some really important ways that we need to be looking at this in order to continue to build community around the big stuff that we got to do together. I love that I get to do some conservation storytelling. It's not all stuff that I'm involved in. It's about sharing those bright spots that I have had the privilege of, the giants on whose shoulders I've had the opportunity to stand in my own role of as a conservation leader. And with so many new folks in the community and so much change in the community, I do think it's also important that we share some of the backstories on these conservation bright spots, because we see things happening, but we don't all know these incredibly complex backstories that got us to where we are today. Out for a walk with folks talking about this beautiful, forested green space, the gorgeous Comox Valley, explore the tourism, this beautiful place we all live. We actually live in a significantly impacted or altered landscape here that has been incredibly impacted by the colonial history of Vancouver Island over the past 170 years, 180 years. So I'm going to share a few. I'm going to try and do it fairly quickly because I really do hope we'll have some time to talk at the end too. But just like climate change has been caused by the digging up and the destruction of ecosystems that range from fossil fuel extraction or industrial scale farming, or the development and coverage of land, the interrelationship between ecosystem protection and climate resilience is also very, very powerful. And Tina has already spoken to this. And we have some things to learn about and to celebrate locally. And I'm going to start. It's so great because these have been touched on and I didn't know all the things Tina was going to reference. No, and Sarah at the beginning, Sarah referenced a couple of these projects too. So I'm going to start with the Solom River. The Solom River for me is the ultimate symbol of resilience and hope in the local conservation community. If the Solom could come back from the brink, then all things may be possible. The backstory is on this is that back in the 40s, the Solom was known as like an angler's paradise with pink and coho, chum, steelhead salmon. Even with industrial scale logging underway throughout the watershed, the river was still holding its own until someone opened a copper mine at Mount Washington. So the Mount Washington copper mine was developed on private land thanks to something called the Dunsmuir Legacy, which is one of my favorite side stories that I can't totally get into tonight. But it's basically how the whole east side of Vancouver Island became privately held as the result of a transfer of unceded land to a wealthy coal baron named Robert Dunsmuir. And he sold these lands to subsequent forestry and mining companies over the last 120 years, and they sold it to someone, and they sold it to someone, and here we are today. So there was a copper mine that was opened in the 1960s, and then it was abandoned after about 4 years by its international backers. And it was left to live on as basically a textbook example of the complex and long-term challenges of something called acid rock drainage. And it's awful for aquatic ecosystems. So when the best way to describe this, just so we kind of know what went on there, is that mine waste and tailings get exposed to air and water, oxidation occurs. If all the minerals and conditions are right for this, it produces something called acid runoff that can damage downstream aquatic environments. And I see Angela's here tonight too. She's been really involved in Solom. And it may have looked like an innocuous trickle. Now you just look at the pipe there in the photos, but for decades, the creek was carrying toxic effluent from the Mount Washington copper mine, and it basically killed the Solom River. Even before the last ore truck rumbled down the mountain, exposed mine waste was already leaching metal into a tributary that would eventually decimate fish populations in the Solom River. 4 years of mining led to a 40-year reclamation effort. Okay, that's the downside. Next slide. So the restoration of the Solom River is a project that's been championed by many of the giants of the local conservation community. People you should learn about, like the late Father Charles Brandt, Wayne White, who's still really active with the Solom River Restoration Society, as well as the Courtney Fish and Game, and countless other community members who are the foundations of today's conservation achievements. So local knowledge holders have been observing issues for decades, but the restoration took off when DFO, Department of Fishery and Oceans, released 2.5 million fry into the creek, and 2 years later, there are only 10 pinks counted in the river. Like, that's an insane negative ratio. So over the next 8-10 years, there was a bunch of low-tech cleanups that were done. The province threw like a little bit of money on it. But when they were doing water testing in the mid-90s, it was still seen to have not made progress. So I moved here. I remember when this file was super active. I moved here in 95. I actually ran for the Green Party in 95, and the Solom River was one of the top environmental issues in the valley. The Solom River Task Force, which included community members, government, local First Nations, and industry, they lobbied to have the Solom declared one of BC's most endangered rivers. There was massive advocacy on the part of the community. It brought together hunters and fishermen, environmentalists, and forged some of the really powerful and unique conservation partnerships that continue today in the Comox Valley. There's some incredible and powerful relationship that goes on between the hunters and the fishermen and the tree huggers and the stream keepers and the artists, and that interplay is what makes this place so beautiful and why I've so fallen in love with the Comox Valley. So they did some wetland diversion. It wasn't really enough. And then finally, this advocacy got the province to come through, and they ended up capping the main pit. And within 3 years, 62,000 pink salmon returned. That was the largest since the 1950s. In 2015, 129,000 pinks came back to the river, which was the highest number that they have seen since fish counts began in 1953. So Solom River Restoration Society continues to champion restoration to deal with logging and development impacts on the Solom, and to support the health of salmon stocks, to absorb high flow events and big rain events. And there's tons more to learn about the Solom River because it's also a critical watershed for the farming and agricultural community. But I'm trying to just move through some of these stories at a pace just so you can find out more and learn more and connect with these organizations if the story is intriguing to you. So long-term monitoring, further restoration work, huge partnerships with Comox Guardians, and future work on the old mine site will likely still be required. But in 2021, there was a record-breaking pink salmon run that exceeded 155,000, which was the highest number that they've ever seen in the Solom River. Next slide. This is one of my absolute favorite local projects. I love the visibility, the rawness, the stark beauty, and the possibility that sits on the shores of the Courtenay River. And for thousands of years, this was an indigenous fish processing area, as well as an ancestral burial site. It was a place where those stories of salmon run so dense you could walk across their backs to get across the river. Colonial settlement saw the river and the Courtenay River become a place of transportation and economic activity for early logging and farming communities. So the river was dredged and channelized over time and gradually lost its natural ability to absorb winter storms, storm surges. It was also the site, if you've lived here long enough, you'll remember that particular view of the Field Sawmill, which was a major industrial site and employer, and represented a time where the Comox Valley was still at the center of the BC timber industry. I mean, again, stories we can learn about. The Royston log yards off of Royston were the largest in the Salish Sea. The trees of the Comox Valley and the Comox Lake watershed built Vancouver. We were at the heart of it. But the other photo I want you to look at is the one on the left, which is something that's called by the people who are involved in the Couscous project, the Killing Wall. And so as part of the channelization and the sort of channelization and straightening and industrial sort of reshaping of the river, excuse me, what they've done is created a scenario where the salmon that were coming up the river that used to be able to hide in the rocks and the woody debris couldn't do that anymore because there's this metal wall, and it created a scenario where the seals could just come and pick them off and eat them when they're making their way up the river. I'm just going to mute myself and cough. You go from not talking, to talking a lot, and then I end up coughing. So this wall, so known as the Killing Wall, and it became a huge problem in terms of also the salmon that were trying to make its way back up the Courtenay River. You go to the next slide. But this is such a place of hope. The reconnection of this site to the Hollyhock Flats is all part of the restoration of the estuary and its critical functioning. And estuaries play a really important role in mitigating the impacts of climate change. They have a carbon sequestration role, they support biodiversity, and they also help communities to be able to deal with the impacts of increased storm and weather events. softening the hard edges, restoring native grasses and plants, the naturalization of water channels, the removal of the killing wall. All these things will support our ability to adapt to the impacts of climate change, coastal floodplain changes, and will restore biodiversity. So Kuskusum is this powerful, visible, and tangible example of the community restoring the commons, reconciliation in action, biodiversity protection, nature-based climate solutions, all wrapped up in one super beautiful and complex project championed by Project Watershed in partnership with Comox First Nations and the City of Courtney. And it's an example of what needs to be happening and is happening in estuaries up and down the coast to shore up natural defenses through restoring the gifts of nature and doing it as a community. Next slide. This is the one where I have to be careful also not to go on and on. This is the Cumberland Forest. So if you know me, this is where my heart is each and every day. The Cumberland Forest is part of that same Dunsmuir private land legacy that led to the Mount Washington Mine project that impacted the Solom, Cumberland, Comox Lake watershed. The Cumberland Forest has been a base for extensive and industrial scale mining and logging for over 130 years. A massive amount of carbon was pulled from the earth to fuel the Industrial Revolution. The photo on the right is the #4 coal mine at Comox Lake, the single largest coal mining operation in the Comox coalfields. And although we like to think about the beautiful forest surrounding the village, 100 years ago it was a sea of stumps and a lot of coal dust. And even though we think about Cumberland as a bastion of green forests and trails, it's still the site of active logging by mosaic and manulife. It is still a place facing the alteration of the landscape. And that photo on the left was actually just taken last fall. Next slide. But this story, of course, is in the late 90s. The community in Cumberland came together when they realized they didn't own the land that surrounded the village. And they knew somehow that our economic and environmental future was inexorably linked to our ability to control our destiny as a community. So the community formed the Cumberland Community Forest Society in 1999 and began to negotiate with timber companies, and nobody believed it was possible. Are you kidding? You're gonna like buy a forest with like bake sales and plant sales? And since then, that community has purchased over 500 acres in 4 separate transactions, and we're actually working on a 5th as we speak in the Lower Perseverance Corridor. Now, this project has actually helped shape the community, and it involves so many different aspects of the community: sport, art, children, schools, science. So what's happening is that Cumberland is actually creating a climate resilient watershed for future generations. We're supporting the watershed's ability to respond to climate change, to respond to changes in weather patterns, which will see these less snowpack and more rain. It'll have intact forests that are able to filter, store, and slowly release water. It's this incredible function that a forest provides, as well as contributing to our quality of life and our pleasure as a community. It serves this function, these watersheds serve this function that will ensure drinking water for our community in the future. It protects biodiversities and species at risk, and the wetlands that are protected and mature forests actually play a role in protecting our communities from fire. And the last one here is we know also that the forest protection we're doing in this stage of forest protection is measured and quantified as contributing significantly to carbon sequestration. And we were awarded the CBRD's Road to 2030 project through measuring the carbon sequestration achieved by avoiding the harvesting of a large parcel of land in Lower Perseverance. So we're building community climate resilience through nature-based climate solutions. Next one. So Salish Sea, I'm going to approach this one with total humility. This is like the area that I have the least like full knowledge and understanding of what's going on, but I really wanted to touch on the ocean from a conservation perspective. So this is like super high level. So we know oceans are a critical piece of the climate change puzzle. We usually think about it in terms of rising sea levels and climate change, or the absorption of heat, which Tina talked about, and all of this impacts biodiversity. So the ocean story is also about doing whatever we can to bolster the ocean systems that support biodiversity as they work so hard to receive and sequester the heat and the carbon resulting from climate change. So when I was growing up, there was a lot, like the whales were going extinct. Like Greenpeace was out on Zodiacs and they were climbing the sides of Japanese or Norwegian whaling ships, and the pictures, the harpoons and the blood in the water. I mean, this has informed my very being. And that whole development of Greenpeace and that coastal activism at a time when the whale hunt was still happening really shaped my childhood. And I think other Gen Xers from the BC coast, I think, could say the same. Also, the local herring fishery has been a huge focus and big concerns about the impacts on forage fish through fishing. And the big one up there is herrings. You'd be aware of, like, that's a picture of the herring fishery. So Pacific herring are the foundation of a marine food web. They're considered one of the most important marine species on the coast, and they directly support other small predators like salmon, who are the primary food source for predators like the orca. So herring are the foundational species from an ecological, cultural, and economic role. And there are some major, major concerns about the state of the herring fishery and its impacts on that web if that fishery were to continue to expand at the rate it was. So next slide. I see some notes on the side. I'm totally just about to speak to that. Exactly. So there's organizations like the Denman Marine Conservation folks and the Hornby Island Conservation groups who have been working, fighting, and organizing for a moratorium on the herring fishery. And they did it through this amazing combination of education, advocacy, art. They have this herring festival, and you're like, oh, it's a herring festival. And it's actually like a total act of activism around ending forage fish fishery, but it's done through like play and theater, and there's art programs in the schools. And I'm like, it's like a kindred soul community to Cumberland. Our local MP has been an amazing champion also of this. And he's done some really positive work across a lot of sectors of really getting out there and putting forward private member bills and bringing issues forward in Ottawa in a way that we really haven't seen before. So the end of the whale hunt, habitat protection, biodiversity protection through protecting food sources, changes in the interface and changes in tourism has seen significant population recovery for whales, and specifically the humpback whale. It is incredible what we're seeing up and down the coast in terms of the return and the resilience of humpback species. And when I think about what so informed my heart and my tears and my passions as a kid, this idea of the whales, I remember my little report when I was like 9. It's like, how can man kill so beautiful a species? And it was a beluga. Like, I was just like cutting pictures of whales and making reports. And when I had a chance to go out a couple of years ago and see all the humpbacks up and down the coast, it's just like, it is hope. The ban on commercial whaling in 1986 is part of what led to this recovery, and the population is now thought to be about 93% of its original size. By taking away the threat of hunting, having safe places to survive and thrive, humpback numbers have almost entirely recovered. Next slide. And my last slide. This arts-based climate action. And this really builds on what Tina's talking about in her presentation as well. There's 4 pictures here. The bottom right is Nomadic Tempest at Couscous, where I was able to work with Project Watershed to produce a caravan theater performance. It came in on the barge. They did this wacky play, and we built a whole theater site around it. And this is some of my colleagues coming down and being the birds and being roving performers down at the Couscous site. To the right is the Climate March in Cumberland back in late 2019. That was in support of the Fridays for Action that were happening in response to Greta's work. And this reminded me of Extinction Rebellion. It's a type of sort of radical, almost more wildly creative punk rock approach to climate activism, which really also speaks to me. It's our friend Kathy Stoiko being a dead bee in the middle of the road while Robin took chalk and did like a body outline around it. And I mean, that may seem dark and bleak, but one of the cool things about Extinction Rebellion is that it allows us to tap into some of that dark stuff is where the creative stuff is. Some of the, that those two things can coexist. And Extinction Rebellion is a very interesting place where those two things coexist. And I encourage you, if you oscillate between the absurdist and the dark and the hopeful and the creative, it's an interesting place to dip in. The 2 above are the Forest Stories Project, which is a theater program I've run for the last 5 years in Cumberland. On the right-hand side, the children are sequestering carbon dragons in the forest. The root fairies are calling the dragons into the forest and getting them to climb down, taking the dragon and dancing the dragon down into the roots of the trees where the dragon is sequestered by the forest and then returns as this baby dragon and joins the creatures of the forest again. And on the left-hand side was a show that we did right in Weird Church back in December. And one of the things that we've done with our shows is work with reverse timelines. And sometimes that's sort of like what Tina's done tonight, where we're starting with this intensity and this drama and this darkness of the story, and it's a work back approach. It's working with reverse timelines and going, okay, here's this crazy, dark, wild story. And what happens if we put our hands over our eyes and count down from 10 and step back and can move ourselves back along the timeline and think about the choices that we're making and the things that we do. And that's what that play was about. The kids got to start at a place of crisis and work their way back to the place where choices and decisions could be made. And those choices and decisions changed how the story ended. Arts-based climate action is the process of redeveloping the creative narrative, the role of myths and legends in helping us to make sense of the world around us and to respond to the big questions of our time. There is such a need for humanity to rewrite these stories, and people are doing it. We're using story and art and theater as a means to understand and respond and act. And many of these old stories don't serve us anymore. They don't serve our survival. It's time for a universal rewrite. So just like some of these old fairy tales, like the Disney feminine archetypes or the Disney colonial storylines aren't serving us, right? Neither are some of the stories we've learned from our own grandparents and parents, from our own culture. And remembering and then relearning stories of traditional knowledge holders is critical. And embracing other ways of knowing and doing our work in a good way is the path to resilience. We are a story unfolding. We are also authors of that story. We still have agency, both in what happens and how we interpret what's happening, and then how we work with other people. More joy while we do the hard work of saving the world. Joy woven together with the deep fear and the anger and the creativity and the passion and the life force. And I am privileged and hopeful and honored to get to do this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Meaghan. Thank you so much. And next up, Will's going to speak to some projects that I'm really looking forward to learning from you, Will, and hearing about these things. I was pondering today how much I'm going to learn tonight from you. So take it away, Will, and just cue me when you want me to move slides.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you again, Meaghan.
Thank you, Meaghan. So from sort of the sort of creativity of art, we're now going to move to government, and hopefully it won't get too dull. I just wanted to share a handful of stories of things that have been going on in local government in the last couple of years that point to that set a really encouraging tone in my mind. And the first one is about the adoption of UNDRIP, and many of you are probably familiar with UNDRIP. It's the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And I think reconciliation has to be a core principle of all that we do in government, including our work to address climate change, inequity, and threats to biodiversity. And the Government of Canada and the Government of BC have adopted UNDRIP as their framework for reconciliation with our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And just to address sort of the images on the screen, you'll see the Métis flag on the left. That was Louis Riel Day at City Hall, and the Métis flag being raised that day. The middle is the logo of the Wache Friendship Center for people who are living off reserve, but in our community. And on the right, a delegation from the Comox First Nation when the totems in downtown Courtenay were dedicated. And one of the encouraging signs I see is the local governments of the Comox Valley have shown real leadership as some of the first in BC to adopt UNDRIP as a framework for our action in local government on reconciliation. Cumberland got things started first. They passed a resolution back in 2016 supporting UNDRIP, thanks to the leadership of Councillor Jessie Kettler. And when I was elected, her work inspired me to see if I could do the same thing in my community. I saw the adoption of UNDRIP as a way for Courtenay to frame and guide the work that we do with Comox First Nation and with other Indigenous peoples in our community, and to ensure that all levels of government were committed to the same goals as we work towards reconciliation. So after consulting with Comox First Nation Hegus, Nicole Rempel, I brought forward a resolution to City Council that we adopt UNDRIP as our framework for reconciliation, that we incorporate the principles of UNDRIP in the development of our new official community plan, that we work with the Comox First Nation to incorporate UNDRIP into planning and decision-making, and as well as developing a program to educate our city staff about UNDRIP and history and culture of the Comox First Nation. And I'm really pleased to say, since I work with such an amazing group of people, that this passed unanimously in Courtenay City Council. And also in the last year or so, the Comox Valley Regional District adopted a, sorry, I'm just losing my place in my notes. Where am I? Here I am. A statement of reconciliation, which built on the already strong Indigenous relations framework that the CBRD had put together. And this statement of reconciliation formally recognizes CBRD's commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous people as outlined in UNDRIP and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and the Canadian Constitution. And also more recently, thanks to the leadership of Stephanie McGowan, the town of Comox has adopted UNDRIP as well. So we are one of the few places in Canada where every single local government has stepped up to formally adopt UNDRIP and to try to move our relationship with the Comox First Nation and with the other Indigenous folks in our community forward. I think that many of us are on our own journeys of reconciliation, and I just wanted you to know that your local governments are on the same path and doing what we can to walk the walk. Could I get the next slide, please, Tina? It's about food security through urban agriculture, and my colleague Wendy Morin is in the audience, and this is about a remarkable piece of resolution that she brought to Courtenay City Council. And I think our recent experiences during COVID have really underscored the need for local resilience and precarious and the unstable nature of global supply chains. And that's particularly true in the area of food security. I think we all remember times where shelves were empty at the beginning of the pandemic and even occasionally recently. And it's not just that, but food security is also deeply impacted by social inequality. So as a result, while we're fortunate to live in a valley with a bountiful array of local food, many cannot afford the good food they need. So true food security begins at home. And my colleague, Councillor Wendy Morin, who serves as our representative on the Comox Valley Food Policy Council, saw this need and put forward a comprehensive urban agriculture resolution to Council. And her resolution sought to allow small-scale commercial urban food production, including chickens, not roosters, chickens, bees, and urban farm stands on all residential property within the city of Courtenay. And Cumberland also has a similar bylaw, and Comox allows farm stands and bees, but limits chickens to a smaller number of large lot properties in the community. So what can you do to get involved? Well, if you enjoy honey, fresh eggs, and produce from your own garden, then get farming and enjoy the satisfaction and security that comes with providing much of your own food. If you want to start producing food for others, you can now set up a farm stand at the end of your own driveway and share fresh food with your neighbors. This has to be one of the most satisfying and delicious ways of taking action on climate change. And Tina, can you get the next slide, please? So another area where the Comox Valley is really moving forward on climate is how we handle our waste. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the idea of a circular economy, of trying to reduce the amount of material that we discard as waste and wherever possible, finding a new use for it. Well, demolition and deconstruction waste is a considerable source of material in our landfills. In our region, construction and demolition waste makes up 22% of all waste. And you really wouldn't believe what we're throwing away. I'm not just talking about windows and doors, things which would seem to be obviously reusable, but deconstruction can salvage up to 99% of materials in a building. And one of the things I didn't know until I started looking into this is that most homes built before 1970 were framed using old growth lumber. So while we're logging the last stretches of old growth, we are also hauling old growth lumber off to the dump. As an example, recently when the Lake Trail School was demolished, the hardwood floor from the gym, which could have been salvaged and used as flooring, I would imagine, given it was already flooring, was simply smashed to bits and hauled away. This is a sad end for old growth lumber. You know, old growth lumber is an amazing building material. It has 1/12 the embodied carbon of new materials and is 3 times as strong. And above and beyond the fact this is just a tragic waste, it's also a very expensive problem. Landfill space is costly, and we all subsidize it through our taxes. It's also huge economic waste. It was estimated, I was staggered by this number, that the value of salvageable wood from demolitions in all of Metro Vancouver is over $3 billion per year. So anyway, I brought this idea to the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board and asked if, as part of our strategic planning, if we could look into pivoting from demolition to deconstruction. And as I said, I work with a lot of great people in local government, and I'm happy to say this received unanimous support from our board. And staff are working on developing plans and policies in the near term to make that pivot. And so in terms of what you might be able to do in terms of taking action, when this policy is coming for public feedback, I urge you to support it. But in the meantime, the Habitat Restore is a thriving center for reuse in our community. So whenever possible, if you can take materials there rather than the landfill, that's a great idea. When you're going to be doing some building, make the Restore your first stop when you're looking for materials. And could you hit the next slide, please? And another good news story from the world of waste is that we're opening our organics composting facility later this year, should be in September. And that'll be able to handle waste from over 30,000 homes in the Comox Valley and Campbell River. And organic waste makes up 30% of our landfill, and it produces prodigious amounts of methane, which, as you probably know, is a greenhouse gas that is up 20 times as damaging as carbon dioxide. So by organizing a centralized composting site, rather than allowing these organic materials to rot in a landfill, we're going to produce compost that can be used by local farms and homeowners. So between our compost facility and our move from demolition to deconstruction, we're aiming to reduce the amount of material going to our landfills by almost 50%. And that's work worth doing. The next slide, if I could get it, is something that's a little Courtney specific, if you'll indulge me for a minute. It's our new OCP, or Official Community Plan. Every local government has an official community plan. It's like a blueprint for the future. It sets out where and how we'll grow, what kinds of building we'll do, and what zoning we want, and what transportation will look like, among other things. And our OCP was from 2005. And so when we began our term in 2019, we were beginning the process of organizing an update to it. We talked a few minutes ago about the OCP, about the resolution I put forward that the OCP should be developed in a way that's consistent with UNDRIP. If you look around that sort of compass looking thing, it'll have on the outside are 4 words indicating the 4 kind of cardinal directions that are guiding our work. And as you'll see, it's sort of between 9 o'clock and midnight is reconciliation as a primary focus. And the other one primary focus that I had an interest in trying to move forward was the climate, be explicitly involved. So I put forward a resolution in 2019 that climate change be considered at every stage of development of our official community plan. And again, happy to say that working with great people, that was something the council gathered around and supported. And that plan is now a reality. It was slowed down a bit by COVID, but our staff found lots of creative ways to engage with the public in a lively dialogue. And now that we have a draft official community plan, it got released just a couple of weeks ago, and we're planning another round of dialogue and looking for feedback on the plan. So this is a place where you can get involved if you wish to. There's an online survey. It's quite easy to do. It takes only a few minutes on the OCP. There'll also be online open houses, February 9th, 12th, and 17th. And groups of 10 can even ask for a meeting with one of our planners to discuss the plan. And you can find all this on our website. If you just Google letters OCP and Courtney, it'll be the very first link. Just click on that and you'll get all the information. So whether you live, work, play, or go to school in Courtney, or if you just visit from time to time, we'd really love to hear your thoughts about the city's future. So please do participate if you can find the time to do that. Next slide, please. And divestment. So local governments have considerable sums of money invested. We keep aside reserves, which are sort of savings accounts for future projects. And The city of Courtenay, for instance, has many millions of dollars in these accounts. And my colleague on council, Councillor Melanie McCollum, saw this as an opportunity for us to put our money where our mouth is. Given that we've chosen to consider climate change as an essential part of our planning, it only makes sense that our investments not be supporting the fossil fuel industry and driving climate change. And her research also showed that avoiding fossil fuels is also good for the city's bottom line financially. Divesting from fossil fuels doesn't represent a decrease to the city's revenues. In fact, the fossil fuel sector has not performed well over recent years, and it has been beaten by renewable energy investments for each of the last 10 years. So she brought forth motions to both Courtenay Council and the CBRD board, asking staff to develop investment guidelines that exclude fossil fuels and focus instead on investments that consider what's called ESG, or environmental, social, and corporate governance impacts. So looking for companies that are doing the things that we want to be supporting. And once again, I'm happy to say that both those resolutions passed. And in terms of things that you might be able to do, if you live in a community that hasn't yet divested, that's something you could perhaps talk to your local elected officials about. And on a completely personal level, you can also divest yourself from fossil fuels. There are a number of different funds and ETFs out there which have specifically screened for removing fossil fuels. Also, there are also ones which remove armaments and many other things you may not want to put your money into. But if you have dollars, voting with those dollars is a way of making your opinions heard and making sure that you're not backing something that aggravates things like climate change. And is that it? I went through that much more quickly than I thought. This is the last page. It is indeed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thanks.
Wow, I've learned so much from both of you this evening. Thank you so much. And I wanted now to, I'm recognizing the time because we had so many wonderful things to talk about, but I do want to invite audience in for a moment to do what's called a chatterfall. And that is that we've learned about all these projects from myself and from Will and Meaghan, but I know there are lots and lots of other projects that are promoting climate resilience, be it small, be it large. And so I wanted to take just a moment for you to think about inspiring projects that you're aware of with regards to climate change and type them into the chat, but do not hit enter yet. I want to do what's called a chatterfall. So I'm just going to give, about 15 seconds here for people to think of something that they've observed, maybe something they've wanted, something that they've seen happening, something that they've been involved with, and just invite you to enter that into the chat, but don't hit enter yet. It's called a chatterfall. So this is going to be a chatterfall of climate resilience inspiration. And I'm going to do a countdown and we're all going to hit enter at one time. I'll pull the chat up onto the screen so we can all see it and you'll all be able to see your own chat. I'm just going to give us another 5 seconds or so. It could be anything, something that you've seen, heard of, that you want to promote with regards to climate resilience in your community. I recognize that not everyone is from this community. And I'm going to count down. I'm going to count to 3 and then say go. And we're all going to hit enter.
Tina, so wait 1 second. If you unshare your screen, we will be able to see it more clearly. Oh. Look at your beautiful face showing my screen.
Ingrid.
And while people are madly typing, I want to let them know that we also have boards up at Weird Church as part of the art project, as part of the gallery at Weird Church, where you can put your Post-its on the boards. So there are several participatory art pieces at the gallery that I'm sure Tina will talk about in a minute, but I just want to make sure that if you're local to the Comox Valley and you can get your body into the church at some point, I would really encourage you to get your hands on a Post-it and write your grief and your hope on the boards. And all of this from both the chat that we're about to have and those Post-its are going to be held and populated into things that we can turn to when we need them.
Thank you, Ingrid. That was really good because I was rushing because of time and we didn't need to rush. Hopefully we have a chatterfall. Let's see what happens here. I'm going to count us down and say 1, 2, 3, go, hit enter. Let's see what happens. Oh, look at this. That project, bike lanes, Comox Valley, food hub. We need a food hub, bicycles, active transportation promotion among youth. Cumberland working on a Green New Deal. Totally. Kitchen organics program. No bottled water. Oh yeah. Building the new lake trail. So good. Food security education. Look at all this that's going on. See the start line fallacy is all wrong. We're in the middle of this amazing story. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Community garden now. Thank you. And thanks, Ingrid, for mentioning the art project. I'm going to reshare my screen so I can show you a little bit and then get to Q&A. I'm going to find my share screen again. Share that one. And
did you say you were capturing that list? That list is like awesome. That's being
really good.
Is capturing it, or does it get recorded automatically? It's a great
Yeah,
list.
I've got it. I've got it.
Yeah, we're gonna save the chat. Beaver Lodge Forest Lands, Greenway Land Trust. So good. So what can we do in our lives through the decisions we make, the choices we make to tip the scales from fear towards love? And I'm just going to share with you quickly what else is happening in amidst this climate series, which sort of turned into something bigger than we thought. And it's been lovely so far. And we've only just started. So this is all happening with Weird Church, which is a social justice oriented, queer inclusive, incarnational, contemplative, irreverent, radically hospitable community of love. Weird Church affirms the wisdom that lives within the sacred stories of every culture, tradition, and generation. And they take ancient practice and spiritual wisdom and apply it to contemporary concerns like climate change. And so this is why we're hosting this with Weird Church. And I'm just going to tell you what's coming up next. So the first thing is next Thursday, we start bi-weekly series of conversation circles. And these are just what they sound like, where we're going to sit around and talk about climate change. They'll be loosely facilitated conversations of sharing. There are online and in-person options available on a limited basis. And this is an image of circles at work, deep dialogue about climate crisis, building community, and advancing climate action. And we want to hopefully overlap there and just create a safe space to do that. So registration is on the Weird Church website. And as I said, it's every other Thursday until April 21st from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And of course, public health orders will all be followed for both in person and, well, of course, online. So that's one of the items. The other thing that's been mentioned a few times is Gallery at Weird Church, which is awesome. Is part of the show is a main artist that will be rotating through, and the back part of the church is filled with the climate resilience art show. So there's art, and there are 3 participatory elements. The bottom left you see there, when you're in the church, you can grab a bag of clay and create a figure to gather symbolically around the fire. The fire doesn't show up as well in pictures as when it's lit up in person, but figures that have already been created by participants, including some of the people that are in the Zoom room tonight. And so feel free to come by and look at that and enjoy it and understand the symbol of us gathering together when we can't necessarily gather, and also us just gathering together in contemplation. The middle photo is some of my mother-in-law's friends weaving their hopes for the future into a giant set of crocheted angel wings. And so you can participate in that way. And then the sticky notes, as Ingrid already mentioned, are there with some really nice sports. So there are ways for you to engage with the art as well as just coming and looking at the art. We're also doing another participatory art project on February 19th. You can register for a time slot on the Weird Church website. So we are painting with artist Rowan Halliwell murals on the back of a couple of the pews that will be representative of climate resilience in the Comox Valley. I think we're going with the pollinator theme, and that work is in progress. So February 19th. We're also going to be making climate march signs that day, hopefully with Comox Youth Climate Council. We're just, they're rallying volunteers drop in, make a climate sign. And like we're going to try to do a march at the end of the art day down Dunsmuir. So watch for that. There'll be more information again, all on the website. We have a climate resilience in the garden. So you can join expert herbalist and teacher Amanda Howe. And she's going to be sharing ideas about how to turn our gardens into beacons of hope and climate resilience, sowing seeds of physical and emotional health, optimism, joy, and connection with the spirit of this beautiful place we call home. And then our final night will be the Story Unfolding, which is an evening of readings by local writers. So that's at 7 p.m. on April 30th in person. Readings of stories, poetry, and nonfiction related to climate and the environment. And authors include Tracy Scoos, Cornelia Hoogland, Bernice Friesen, Judy LeBlanc, Corwin Fox, and more. We're trying to talk some people into doing a little bit of some funny pieces too, maybe some humor. And then the evening we'll have a facilitated activity for the audience, and we'll end up hopefully pouring out onto the streets for a little dance party with DJ Josie, who's local here. So that'll be the Story Unfolding with stories. Those are just some of the things happening in the next 3 months, all culminating with this end night. And I want to thank Weird Church. I want to thank Tanis and Ingrid for moderating chat and helping with tech support tonight. And I want to thank Elevate and Comox Valley Foundation's Neighborhood Small Grants for supporting aspects of this project. And I'm sure I have 100,000 other people to thank, which I will throughout this whole process. And I want to invite us now, even though we're quite late now, to be curious and see if there are any questions, and have the floor roll back to Ingrid, who's I think going to speak to that.
Yeah, do you mind unsharing your screen so we can
see? Yeah, right. Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
There you're back. There's your big head now.
There's my big head. I can barely fit it in this Zoom room. No, I do want to just invite everyone to take a breath. That was a lot of information.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are excited to have this project underway, but it's also amazing to have these three people who are actively engaged in this work and have been actively engaged in this work for years and have so much knowledge right here on this Zoom with us. And so I do want to encourage questions. I'm going to open up my view to a gallery so that I can see hands, as well as if you know how to raise a hand in the Zoom room, you click on the reactions button down at the bottom. You can raise your hand if you have questions for our fantastic humans here. And before we do that, I want to just say thank you to Tina and Meaghan and Will for sharing their loves and their lives with us. I just did a little celebratory emoji there. And yeah, just fantastic. Thank you so much. Not only for teaching us, but also for doing the work. You constantly show up and do the work, and it's brilliant and wonderful and amazing. So thank you so much. Again, I just want to reiterate that someone said to me last Sunday, oh my gosh, I can't even talk about this for 20 minutes without feeling despair. And now we're going to talk about it for like 3.5 months. Yeah, we're going to do that. So really, if you need some care, spiritual care, mental health care, I encourage you to seek out the people that you need to get that support. If you don't know where to go for that, you can email me or call or text me directly, and I can help facilitate that or get you in touch with the people that you need. And I encourage you to get out into the forest around you. Like we try to use all 5 senses when we head into the woods as Weird Church, and even taste. It happens in the woods. So we love our forests. I'm wondering, I see a few hands up. And so I'm going to start with Madam Mayor Baird of Cumberland. I'll invite you to unmute yourself and go right ahead and share your question.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for their presentations tonight. And Ingrid, thank you very much for your support. It's probably the first climate action workshop presentation that I've actually listened to that has been so positive and so hopeful. And it just changed my whole attitude tonight about attending. And so thank you very much. You're all filled with so much passion and knowledge. And it's amazing. And you need to be able to share this with everybody. It's one of the best ones I've ever seen. So thank you. And Tina, kudos to you to making it so that we could all understand some of these seminars that you attend. They're speaking way up here to you, and they forget who they're talking to sometimes. So thank you very much for making it. I'm really excited about this and I look forward to the rest. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. There's a question in here about whether or not Cumberland has a community garden. Who would like to speak to that?
Not at this point.
I could speak to it like briefly that there has in the past, there was many years ago, there was a little garden down in number 6. I'll say two things. One is we don't actually have a lot of apartment, row house or density living here. So actually almost everyone has a place to garden, which is different from in urban environments where people are living in spaces where they can't garden. And secondly, there was a group rallying pre-pandemic around securing land for a food forest. So different from a community garden perspective, but the idea of doing like a permaculture centered garden project. And I think that those wonderful folks will probably get involved in that again. You're in the apartment, there you go. Yeah, so look for I think food forest and permaculture was the direction that the group of people who were organizing were going in. So you might want to keep your ears out for that. And they were looking and talking to Parks and Recreation about options too, about any kind of corner of a recreation. I don't know how far that went, but there was some organizing going on. And there's a Facebook group. I don't know how active it is, but it was called the Cumberland Food Forest.
Sean, I saw, did you have something to say, Sean, to add to that?
No, I think Meaghan covered it pretty well. I know that the village doesn't really have any ready land that's ready to go for something like that, and infrastructure and stuff. There's always been capacity issues. Even for something as simple as a community garden, people would be surprised about what it takes for the village staff. It seems like a small thing, like something like the dog park there's a lot of stuff involved with that. So it's similar to that. Yeah, those are just some of the reasons I think to this point.
There's also one at the school. So the school ran one for a while, but again, it's just, there's been a bit of a dip in energy, but there was a school-based one, and Lake Trail's another example where there's some championing of community gardening. So that's another place to look. CCSS perhaps in the future may end up playing a role in that, the Cumberland Community Schools Society.
Thank you. There was a question a little bit earlier in the chat that said, is there legislation in place that demands salvage of lumber, or is that a regional legislation? Is that provincial legislation? How can we activate that kind of legislation in our communities? Is that a Will question? I think it's a Will question.
I think it might be. As we're just sort of starting to dig into it at Solid Waste. And my understanding is there are a couple different tools you can use. One is that municipalities can issue deconstruction permits rather than demolition permits. And the other is looking at the other end, that's the supply end, and the other end would be the disposal end, that the landfill, the solid waste management group could set limits on what they're willing to accept in terms of materials. So those are the kind of levers that we have at the local level. The province could step in and do something like that if they wish, but that's kind of unfortunately kind of out of our kind of our level of jurisdiction. But right now, like, staff are exploring all the options that are available, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the results are, what policy will drive it forward.
I could just comment on one part to that, is that there are now companies that will come on and decommission a building to save the wood in the building. And there's one company that's looking at a building in the village. So hopefully that it's all going to work out.
I'd add there are a couple of companies that do that. There's one which works in partnership with Habitat, and they salvage what they can in terms of old growth and they sell it, and then everything else that comes out of a deconstructed building goes to habitat that's usable. It's a really great zero waste business collaboration model that's there.
And we have talked about it at Village Council.
Will, when you referred to the lake trail floor, I just want to tell a very brief story, which is that I was doing landfill tours with all of the grade 6, 7 students at Lake Trail when that arrived at the landfill. So those students saw Lake Trail in the garbage. It was very powerful. It was, and they were like, what? So we got to see this huge pile of rubble that was their old school. Yeah, very interesting. So
Wow.
I'm really happy to hear about that.
If I could, I used to be a house mover for 5 years, and I've moved many of the houses in the valley. And just to talk about what Will was saying, you could barely put a screw into so much of the wood of these old houses. Like the new drills just aren't even powerful enough to put a screw to, get the houses ready to move. So there's so much valuable lumber in all the houses. And that was actually one of the first recycling businesses, is house moving. On that scale, and not that many people realize that, but it was kind of ahead of its time, saving all these houses and stuff. So yeah, and I know that there is a real flavor at the board to start the deconstruction. I would support a giant, huge building in front of the scales before it even gets in there. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. We know the reality of that at Weird Church very well, because while the roof and the exterior and the interior of the building may be in need of some repairs, the bones of the church are strong and will not be going anywhere anytime soon. Sheila, I saw your hand up. Was there something you wanted to add to that conversation, or a question you had?
Well, it was adding to the school garden thing. Meaghan did mention the garden up at Cumberland, and so we are now in the process. The board brought forward a motion asking our senior management to look into developing sustainable school garden program, very comprehensive. We had our first report from Director Vivian Collier, who's been working on this and really making some great progress, and it was quite exciting. It was at our last board meeting, so people who are interested could go and check the website for that, for her talk, which was at the beginning. So it's a work in progress, but one of the things that we know is that the school gardens thrive when they're attached to community groups that support them on a year-round basis. And we know that schools have land. And I, just know myself that the school garden was adjacent to the elementary school up in Cumberland, but the foods room in Cumberland School at the junior high, high school, you could open the door and have a garden right there. And so I would expect that we will be looking for to work with the community school to build a cadre of volunteers that are there. And I know from my own experience at Lake Trail that as a volunteer, you have opportunities to share in that harvest, that the garden can expand to include beds for community members. And then it's a great demonstration garden that people come for workshops and learn what they can do in their own small sites, or they come in and learn how to garden as a volunteer and take that skill home. So, I think that all of our schools are going to see more opportunities in every single area to have a greater community involvement in a place where there's often land and sun available. So I'm excited about that. The other thing I want to mention is, I'm hoping soon to get some climate action, more focused planning at the school district, because things happen, like to make an organization aware all the time of becoming zero waste in every element of its practice. When we did the transformation of our school from a middle school model to the high school, elementary and high school, all kinds of books and schools were reconfigured, and we sent books. Textbooks get old. The books that we read in 1970, they have, there were 25 copies of something in the dumpster. So I happened to be at the school, and find this dumpster full of textbooks intended to go to landfill. And I, swore at the time, and I don't think I was a trustee at the time, but that's not going to happen, that we have to do things differently. Because of the mixed use, you have to take a bandsaw to a book. And so this applies to libraries. It applies to, I'm sure, so many organizations where recycling paper is not always that simple. And the easiest thing is to just send that dumpster up and say, we don't have time. And I want to be part of making an organization, the one I'm attached to right now, that really is zero waste as it can be. And we don't have, I think that's a crime against nature and morally wrong. That's why, I am considered a little extreme at school board meetings, but we have to do it. And we'd be better off if we have, because a whole bunch of kids will learn how to operate a bandsaw. Who knows? So there's a lot of hidden ways in which our practices are. I love that piece about the crisis is there's the opportunity to change. We are always, change comes when we're forced to change. And I think we are. And it turns out it's a better world when we do it. So great. Thank you guys so much for your presentations and for putting this whole thing together. That's all.
Thank you, Sheila. I realize that maybe I'm too friendly. I should be addressing everyone by their thank you, Trustee McDonald. Thank you, Councillor Paul Hamilton. But I'm aware that it's closing in on 9 o'clock, and the downside of not being together is we don't get to share in that collective love, hope, energy that sustains and fuels us. But the good part is we've been able to drink tea and eat Oreos and knit and wander about and move our bodies as we've needed to. So I just want to thank everyone again, and Sarah, who offered the opening land acknowledgement and recognition of the territories on which we move our bodies and things, has offered to finish us with a song. And I think that is a beautiful way for us to end. Again, if you want more information, you can head on over to weirdchurchcumberland.com. We have write-ups about all the events. A little plug for an upcoming Weird Church community book study, which is also online. Our Truth and Reconciliation team is reading Five Little Indians by Michelle Good, and that book study is online because of COVID, and so you're welcome to join us February 16th to chat about that book. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Gail Kessler, thank you. Ingrid, 3 reasons that I am being brave in doing this song. 1 is my star word for this year was creativity. 2, I saw Jenna, and that gives me confidence because she is a person who's very musical at Weird Church. And 3, the clay figures around the fire. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Blessings to every one of you as you go into this night. Go with love, go with peace, go with joy, go and hug a tree and tell it thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Ingrid, for hosting the Zoom call. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Good night.
Good night.
I'm going to turn on my gallery view and watch everyone trickle away.
All right.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Feel free to unmute yourself and say good night or goodbye.
Good night,
You know-
everybody.
On your timeline narrative thing, I will say, watching this field sawmill come down in the 20 years that I've been here to now, like if that feels like medium along the way,
Yeah.
that's a big deal. That was gross and right there. And a lot of people who live here now don't know that. Like that was the first thing I remember coming here. It's like, wow, like, whoa, what a beautiful river. Whoa, look at that gross building right there. Like the sawmill, and it was so loud. So
Thanks, Genevieve. Good night.
anyways, that's what I have to say about that. So that's really connected. The timeline thing is important to keep people stoked about everything. So that's a good narrative. So thanks you guys. Thanks everybody.
Thanks for being here, Sean.
Here, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Good job, everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, Cindy, I never see your face on a computer.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Bye. So good, you guys. So good.
Good. Yay. Oh, Jim's still on there, I think.
Is he still on, or is he just,